Your first step for this project is going to be to decide what size and shape of paper you would like to use. If you would like to use a rectangle or a square, that's your first choice. And then, of course, the size of that rectangle or square. I've decided to use a square, so I am going to make something called a viewfinder that is also a square. So the way we make a viewfinder is we use the same shape paper that our final design is going to be on. So I'm using a square. And if you were using a rectangle paper, you would use a rectangle viewfinder. And we're gonna fold it in half. And we're simply going to cut from the center. Now I'm actually gonna cut a rectangle shape because it should give me a square when I open it. And you may have to do a few cuts before you get it the right size. That's pretty small. We can try it and see if it will work. So it depends on the size of the leaves that you choose to work with. So if you're choosing the leaves that are real small, that size viewfinder might work just right. If you're choosing leaves that are much larger, like this guy here, it might be too close of a zoom in to really see much. So you may have to cut a little bit bigger square. I forgot to tell you the first thing that you're gonna want to do is probably walk around outdoors and find a few leaves on the ground that you find interesting. Now, they don't have to be beautiful fall colors. You can make your artwork any color you want. So even if they're green, that's okay. We can use whatever colors we would like to when we actually start adding color to this artwork. So I really like this leaf here. So I went ahead and I cut my square a bit bigger. And the reason this is called a viewfinder is it helps us to forget about the whole entire shape. And it helps us to zoom in on just one part that we find interesting. So as I move my viewfinder around, I might find different compositions, like the way that this would fill up my whole square here, depending on how closely I want to zoom into it. And you can see, kind of play around with the different angles and see where you think there's an interesting composition. Now, I really like that spot there because it gives me some nice negative spaces where there is no leaf. And then it gives me an interesting vein pattern where I do see the leaf. So that might be an interesting spot to use as my final composition to fill up that space. Now, if you're thinking that you might rather use more than one leaf in your final piece of artwork, maybe you want to have 2 leaves or 3 leaves, maybe one main leaf that's your focal point and then maybe 2 others that maybe peek in from the corners, you might want to start with a larger square for your viewfinder. And that will allow you to play around with seeing how a couple of different leaves might look kind of peeking in from different spots on your final composition. So what if I had maybe one of these leaves poking in from a corner? Maybe I took another one of these smaller maple leaves and I could place it underneath and maybe have that one coming in from the opposite corner. Now I'm kind of liking that as a composition, but it feels a little empty in these 2 corners. So I may have to do a little bit more figuring out here. Maybe we'll try more of a medium-sized maple leaf and see if I like the way that looks better. Let's try this one and see. And you might notice that my leaves are laminated. Yours do not have to be. I laminated these to keep them flat, and these are actually from last year. I actually really like that composition. So I think I might go with this instead of the first option. It gives me a little bit more detail to work with, and I like the way that these 2 leaves are kind of overlapping each other. Maybe I'll scoot this guy in a little bit more just so I see a bit more of it. I think I like that. So once you find a composition that you like, you have a few options. You could take a picture of it and use it as a reference on your iPad. Or you could actually take some tape and tape your viewfinder to your leaves, or vice versa. If you flip your viewfinder over, you could tape your leaves to the back of your viewfinder. And that way it'll hold them in that same spot, and you can look at it and use it as a reference as you draw this much bigger onto your white square. Now, one benefit to using a viewfinder is to help you find an interesting composition, but another benefit to using a viewfinder is to help you accurately enlarge what you're seeing here into a larger paper. So you don't actually have to draw on yours. I'm just gonna do a very light line through mine to help you kind of see how that would work. So if we imagine even just dividing this square that we're seeing into 4 sections, it helps your eyeballs to focus on kind of one quadrant, 1/4 of it at a time. So now, instead of focusing on that whole square and trying to enlarge it and make it fit this larger piece of paper in an accurate way, I can focus on just one little square at a time and one corner of my paper at a time. And it helps it keep it more in proportion and helps it look more realistic once it's enlarged. I think you can probably see that I very lightly drew those same lines that I have here onto my paper so that I can eventually erase them. And that will help me to kind of put what's inside of each one of these squares inside of each one of these squares, but in a larger, more accurate way. So what I mean by that is if I'm focusing on this upper corner here, and I look in this upper corner here, I notice this main vein, and that's really a good spot to start as kind of those main details. So I notice this diagonal vein, it's pretty thick, starts a little ways down here, and it connects a little bit before halfway down here. So if I look for details like that, and I start sketching in the main parts of those details, then my next biggest detail might be this vein here. So I see it starts pretty close to the center line here, and it ends maybe about 1/3 of the way down there. And so then I could sketch that. And so far, I'm just starting with this and this diagonal line here, and then I can build off from there. I also think that this negative shape right here, where there is no leaf, is also important. I can maybe sketch that in. So I can make a little mark where I see that it kind of ends up there, and then a little less than halfway there. Looks like it comes in, whoopsie, comes in a little bit, and then curves down and connects like that. So I think we're off to a good start. So now, instead of putting in all the detail in this one, I'm gonna go and lay out the main details in each one of these corners before I start adding in all the extra details. So now you can see, if we look at the negative space, that's the white space around the leaves and in between. I think I've done a pretty accurate job drawing the basic shapes of my leaves here and filling my larger square. I think they overlap in the right spaces. The shapes in between look the same. The edges look pretty accurate. So now I can just start looking for all of these smaller veins and just trying to add those in the best I can by really looking closely and trying to notice the details. So I'm gonna start, so we've got the main veins in there. Those are already drawn on my paper, and I'm gonna start with kind of like the medium ones. So like the ones that come off of that main one. I'm not gonna worry so much about the little guys right now.